Hello everyone, my name is Rob, welcome to Kinetic Rugby League. In this video I'll be giving you my NRL Round 2 predictions. Just to quickly recap, last week I got 3 out of 8. So not brilliant, but I have a feeling that a lot of other people's bets were ruined, not just mine. However, if you can find me an individual on this earth that managed to get all 8 correct last week, I may need to consider worshipping them because they might be God. They very well might be God. Now, before I crack on with the first game, if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to subscribe, turn on notifications to stay up to date with new content. And also, if this video offers you any value in any way by the end of it, feel free to like the video as well. It really does help to push it out to more people. But without further ado, let's get cracking with the first game of round 2. Kicking things off, we have the Brisbane Broncos versus the South Sydney Rabbitohs, starting with the team lists. And the side of the Broncos first. In the backs, they have Reece Walsh, Jesse Arthurs, Katoni Staggs, Selwyn Cobbo, Dane Mariner, Ezra Mam and Adam Reynolds. In the forwards, they have Corey Jensen, Billy Walters, Payne Haas, Brendan Piacora, Jordan Rickey and Patrick Carrigan. And on the bench for the Broncos includes Tyson Smoothie, Fletcher Baker, Kobe Hetherington and Martin Tapu or Tapau. It's changed a few times over the last few years, so do let me know in the comments. Onto the side of the Rabbitohs, in the backs they have Latrell Mitchell, Alex Johnston, Isaiah Tass, Richard Kenner, Jacob Gagai, Cody Walker and Lachlan Ilias. In the forwards they have Tavita Totola, Damien Cook, Sean Kepi, Keen Kalamatangi, Talis Duncan and Cameron Murray. And on the bench is Saliva Havili, David Moale, Shakai Mitchell and Thomas Burgess. For me, simply on paper, the Broncos are the stronger squad. I think I talked about in my power rankings video that they didn't have great execution on their plays, the Broncos, but they still look very quick to me. They still look like a dangerous team, and a lot of that is down to Reece Walsh. I think he was given a bit of a bad rap from his performance in round 1, but I don't think it was particularly terrible. I thought he was fine and still looked very effective. I think through the middle, the Broncos offered a lot of threat, and I think they were probably the more dominant team through the middle in the first half, but composure of the Roosters was solid. On the side of the Rabbitohs, I think they did better than expected. I still had them losing. And the gap I had them losing by was smaller than what they did lose by. However, just the way that they looked kind of looked a little bit more convincing than I expected them to be. That left-hand side of Kenner and Gagai, I wasn't too sure how that was going to go, but it looked okay. Looked fine. Defensively, I think the Broncos are still going to be the superior team. And also the fact that the Rabbitohs play a very flat style, I am not a fan of it. But I do always think that when the Rabbitohs are on it and they are pinpoint with how they play in that flat style, they are insanely good. Easily top 4 attacking teams when they nail it on the day. But unfortunately, I don't think the flat style allows them to open teams up as much as others typically do with their depth that they produce. But with the Broncos, Ezra Mam can create moments from nothing, Adam Reynolds leads the team extremely well, and Reece Walsh can easily create overloads on the left and right side. So for me, the Broncos are just going to be too strong in all areas of the game, and I think they'll want to really redeem themselves after last week because they just weren't fully on it. They were okay, but they just weren't fully on it. The Rabbitohs, I think we kind of got everything we could have seen out of them last week or the week before. That felt like the most of the Rabbitohs. That's what it felt like to me. So I'm going to go with the Broncos to win 13+. Next up, we have the Cronulla Sharks versus the Canterbury Bulldogs, starting with the squad of the Sharks. In the backs, they have William Kennedy, Sione Katoa, Jesse Ramian, Siasifa Talakai, Ronaldo Mulatalo, Braden Trindle and Nico Hines. In the forwards is Toby Rudolph, Blake Brayley, Oregon Kafusi, Britton Nakora, Teague Wilton and Cameron McInnes. And on the bench is Dale Finucane, Jack Williams, Royce Hunt and Thomas Hazelton. Looking at the side of the Bulldogs now, in the backs they have Blake Taff, Blake Wilson, Jacob Kiraz, Stephen Crichton, Connor Tracy, Matt Burton and Drew Hutchison. In the forwards is Max King, Reed Marnie, I'm going to butcher this, Piosa Fa'amasuli, hopefully I got that right, Viliami Kikau, Jacob Preston and Jamin Salmon. And on the bench for the Bulldogs is Kurt Mann, Samuel Hughes, Josh Curran and Curtis Morin. For me, starting with the Bulldogs, I like some of the pieces they've got. So I think Blake Taff is okay. I like Stephen Crichton. I like Jacob Kiraz. I like Matt Burton. I even like Drew Hutchison, so just focusing on the backs at this point. I like them as players, but Drew Hutchison for me is not the way to go. Toby Sexton's going to be their best bet. He is in the reserves. For me, I'd just go with Sexton every time. I like Hutchison. I think he could be a utility player off the bench. The second hooker, potential centre, the 13, maybe going to the halves if there's an injury. But it just doesn't offer the same as your typical number 7. So I don't really see him as anything worse or better than Kyle Flanagan, to be honest. And that's personal opinion. Everyone will feel differently about that. I like Stephen Crichton at centre, but it feels like the investment there, and they'll be paying him a good chunk of money, the investment there should have been put into a number 7. Someone that's even better than Toby Sexton and Drew Hutchison. So I think they've got good individuals. I like Matt Burton. I think he's severely underrated. And his kicking game is extremely effective and very dangerous. But moving on to the Sharks, their attack is so quick and precise. When they nail it, they are impressive. I like how they're not afraid to go down the short side, really challenge teams. And it's sometimes when you see a team go down the short side, that means there's just going to be a kicking behind the winger to try and get a repeat set. And that's fine. The Sharks do that. But they also aren't afraid to try and pass the ball in those close quarter spaces, to really work those short sides and to be precise and to be quick. They do a pretty good job of it. And defensively over the last couple of years, they've typically been fairly strong. I think last year was a dip from the year before, but the Sharks are a really great defensive team, typically. And in attack, I like how they can kind of mix up their styles a bit. They can play flat when they need to, but they can play with some depth. I think Braden Trindle and Nico Hines complement each other pretty well. And Braden Trindle's a player he's 24, not had much game time, but in place of Matt Moylan, I think he's done a great job so far, and especially for what I saw last year as well when he came in. So it's good to see him getting minutes. I think the spine of the Sharks is just going to be too strong. They'll create so many opportunities. Individuals like Jesse Ramian and Talakai, they create things from nothing. And they've got great finishes in Katoa and Mulatalo. So I think the Bulldogs, I don't think they'll be without points this week. But for me, the gap between the two teams is astronomical. So I'm going to go with the Sharks to win 13+. Next up, we have the Penrith Panthers versus the Parramatta Eels, starting with the team of the Panthers. In the backs, they have Dylan Edwards, Sonia Taruva, Isaac Tango, Taylor May, Brian To'o, Jerome Luai, and Nathan Cleary. In the forwards, they have Moses Leota, Mitch Kenny, James Fisher-Harris, Scott Sorensen, Liam Martin, and Isaiah Yeo. On the bench for the Panthers is Sonny Luke, Lindsay Smith, Liam Henry, and Luke Garner. Moving on to the Parramatta Eels now. In the backs, they'll have Clint Gutherson, Bailey Simonson, Will Penasini, Morgan Harper, Sean Russell, Dylan Brown, and Mitchell Moses. In the forwards for the Eels, they'll have Regan Campbell-Gillard, Joey Lussick, Junior Barlow, Sean Lane, Bryce Cartwright, and Jermaine Hopgood. And on the bench for the Eels, they'll have Brendan Hands, Ryan Matheson, Joe Offengawi, and Kelma Talangi. So I think the Eels typically put up a really strong challenge in this game, even in the past when they've had like inconsistent moments throughout the season or they've had dips. Somehow they turn up for this game most of the time, and I've certainly ruined a few of my bets, winning and losing, because they're the Eels, for God's sake. Like that, it's what they do. The Panthers I think will be fine, but I certainly don't want to just straight up say that they're going to wipe the floor with the Eels. On paper, they are the significantly better team, but I liked the performance that the Eels put in last week. I think they were very precise with their attack. The lines that they ran were clean. They understood their assignments. Granted, it was against the Bulldogs, who, as an attacking outfit, aren't at the same level as the Panthers right now, especially with the individuals that they've got. So the Eels found it quite easy to get through the middle of the Bulldogs, where they're going to really struggle this time because you're going to have to go up against Liam Martin, Scott Sorensen, Fisher Harris, Leota, and Isaiah Yeo. You're going to have to get through those guys. Now, they've got Campbell Gillard and Junior Barlow that can really take the fight to them. And I think Jermaine Hopgood was a real standout last year, especially in the tackling department. So on the defensive side, I think the Eels could be pretty good. But looking at the attack from the Panthers so far, and from last week, they did create opportunities against Melbourne Storm, but it was just 2 moments they didn't quite get those off. And it was, great scramble defense from Melbourne Storm. But I just want to be careful about not comparing teams week to week, or because the Panthers got nilled and the Eels won by a significant margin, therefore the Eels are clearly the better team. I want to, be careful about going week to week. So I want to think overall and add a bit of context to it. So I think the Panthers will still be fine, but the Eels always offer a challenge in this game. The individual quality that Mitchell Moses has helps kind of drag the Eels into a lot of competitive moments. And Clint Gutherson, for me, is a little bit too hot and cold, but when he's hot, he produces a lot of great moments. So if he's on it, the Eels have a chance, because I think Moses is always on it. And if Dylan Brown is on it as well, then they've really got a chance. So I'm going with the more consistent team on paper, and I'm going to take the Panthers to win 1-12 points. Next up, we have the Canberra Raiders versus the West Tigers. Starting with the team list of the Raiders, in the backs they have Jordan Rapana, Albert Hopoate, Matthew Timoko, Sebastian Chris, Xavier Savage, Ethan Strange, and Jamal Fogarty. In the forwards, they have Josh Papali'i, Danny Levi, Joseph Tarpany, Hudson Young, Zach Hosking, and Morgan Smithies. And on the bench for the Raiders, they have Tom Starling, Emery Gula, Arta Moriata, and Pasami Saulo. Taking a look at the West Tigers now, in the backs they have Jareen Bula, Charlie Staines, Stafford Toa, I'm going to butcher this name here, Solomona Fatape, hopefully I got that one right, Junior Tupou, Lachlan Galvin, and Jaden Sullivan. In the forwards for the Tigers, you have Stefano Utokamanu, Api Coruscant, David Clemmer, Isaiah Papali'i, John Bateman, and Alex Seyfarth. And on the bench for the West Tigers, they have Aidan Caesar, Fanua Pole, Alex Twal, and Samuela Fainu. So apologies for a few messed up names there, but we move on. I'm not going to just straight up say the Tigers are going to have an abysmal season, because I haven't seen them. They could come out and be surprising. Like the Dragons, for example. I had them losing by 13 plus last week. And, well, let's say they didn't lose by 13 plus last week. It was the complete opposite. But this is the Tigers. But I said the same thing about the Dragons. The Raiders put in a really impressive performance last week against the Knights, something that was really unexpected. I think they've got some great individuals in there, and that's what's really going to do it for them. And maybe as a team, they'll be pretty strong. Typically, the Raiders, over the last couple of years, have had decent seasons, nothing that's been terrible, but they've had their dips throughout the season, especially last year. How they managed to keep themselves in the top 8, I do not know. But individuals such as Matthew Timoko, we saw during the Pacific Championships, he had an incredible tournament. He was creating things from nothing. Xavier Savage, I think, on the wing is an interesting one. We'll kind of see how that goes. I'm not usually a fan of wingers and fullbacks swapping positions, but we'll see how that goes. Ethan Strange, I'm not too familiar with his game, but I'm going to learn more and more throughout the weeks. Jamal Fogarty, I think, is a pretty decent, pretty reliable number 7. Good kicking game, smart player, typically makes good decisions. Is not always perfect, but I think is pretty solid. And in the forwards, Papali'i and Tarpany, even Morgan Smithies in there now. They're kind of loving him over there at the moment, which is great to see for an Englishman. On paper, the Raiders look really good, but there are certainly individuals that I can go through now. Jareen Bula is up and coming, really showed his quality last season when he got the opportunity. I think Charlie Staines shows what he can do. Lachlan Galvin, I also don't know anything about him, so he's someone I'm going to have to learn about. Aidan Caesar, who's currently on the bench, I know a little bit more about him, but whether he's going to offer much, I don't know. Jaden Sullivan, I think, was unfortunate not to get more game time at the Dragons last year, and I think has something to offer. Maybe is lacking in the on the side of game management. Maybe he's lacking in terms of structuring the team. But in terms of individual quality, I think he's got something to offer and can possibly break lines. So If the Raiders aren't on it defensively, I think Jaden Sullivan could create some great moments for the Tigers. And in the forwards with Utukamanu, Coruscant, Clemmer, Papali'i, Bateman, like, they're strong players and could maybe punch a hole through the middle, but I think the Raiders would probably be okay dealing with that. So, based on what I've seen so far and what I know of these teams, I'm going to go with the Raiders to win, 13+. Next up, we have the North Queensland Cowboys versus the Newcastle Knights, starting with the Cowboys team list. In the backs, they have Scott Drinkwater, Carl Felt, Valentine Holmes, Zach Labour, Maury Talangi, Tom Dearden and Chad Townsend. In the forwards, they have Jordan McLean, Reece Robson, Jason Taumalolo, Helam Lukey, Jeremiah Nanai and Ruben Cotter. And on the bench for the Cowboys, they have Jake Granville, Griffin Neem, Sam McIntyre, and another one I'm going to mess up, Kulikefu Finafueki. On to the Knights now. In the backs, they have Kalen Ponga, Thomas Jenkins, Dane Gagai, Bradman Best, Greg Marju, Tyson Gamble and Jackson Hastings. In the forwards, they have Jacob Saifiti, Phoenix Crosland, Luke Thompson, Tyson Frizzell, Kai Pierce-Paul and Adam Elliott. And on the bench for the Knights is Jack Cogger, Daniel Saifiti, Jack Hetherington and Jed Cartwright. The Knights were a major disappointment last week. A major disappointment. Given the depth that they've got and the individual quality and the stint that they went on last year with the 10 or 11 game win streak, it made complete sense to back them. But that was an abysmal performance. Coming up against a Cowboys team that started out the gates really, really quickly. Because you look at their individuals, Scott Drinkwater and Tom Dearden, I love watching. I think they're both exceptional players. Absolutely brilliant. And the thing is, if the Knights aren't structurally sound in defence, if they're allowed to kind of get thrown all over the place and out of position, Drinkwater's going to eat that up. Tom Dearden is going to eat that up, and they will punish him for it. Both teams are pretty strong in the forwards, so I expect it'll be a pretty close fight. But in terms of the attacking side with the forwards, I think the individuals on the side of the Cowboys can create more opportunities from nothing. Like Helam Lukey can do that, and Jeremiah Nanai can also do that. Ruben Cotter in the 13 position, I actually quite like. I mean, you can swap him and Tamalolo between 10 and 13 all game long, but I like Cotter in that position. Kai Pierce-Paul's a new addition to the Newcastle Knights. I didn't rate him like that highly whilst he was at Wigan, but I am rooting for him as an Englishman, as a young Englishman especially, to do well and to have a great time over there. Will Price is someone that I'm really excited to see more of, but it's just whether he's going to get a chance to fit in. It's only really going to get a chance if someone like Jackson Hastings is maybe having a poor go of it, or someone in the spine picks up an injury. But other than that, he's not really going to get much game time. However, for me, the Knights look so far off. I think they can redeem themselves with a much more improved performance. The Cowboys, for me, on paper, and from what they showed against the Dolphins, are also, as I said about the Sharks, they're very precise, very accurate, and very quick. You know, this is what I expected more from the Cowboys last season. They had their moments. They went on a 4 or 5 game win streak, I think, towards the back end, but then fell off. But the Cowboys, at their best, are so impressive. So if the Knights want to challenge, Ponga needs to be on it and creating gaps. Gamble needs to be on it and creating gaps. Jackson Hastings' kicking game needs to be on point. Because sometimes Chad Townsend can have a little bit of a lackluster kicking game. That can happen. So I think in the forwards it's going to be pretty even. Maybe leaning more towards the Cowboys slightly. And I think the Cowboys will just create more opportunities. So with that being said, I'm going to go with the Cowboys to win 1 to 12 points. Next up, we have Melbourne Storm versus New Zealand Warriors, starting with the Melbourne Storm team list. In the backs, they have Ryan Pappenhausen, Will Warbrick, Raymond Smith, Nick Meaney, Xavier Coates, Jonah Pizzette, and Jerome Hughes. In the forwards, they have Tui Kamikamitha, Harry Grant, Josh King, Joe Chan, Eliezer Katoa, and Trent Liero. On the bench, they have Tyron Wishart, Christian Welch, Chris Lewis, and Alec McDonald. They're some of the simplest names I've ever read, but I can't say them in plain English for some reason. On to the Warriors now. In the backs, they have Tane Taupiki, Dallin Wateni-Zelezniak, Rocco Berry, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, Marcelo Montoya, Luke Metcalf, and Sean Johnson. In the forwards, they have Adin Fanua-Blake, Wade Egan, Mitchell Barnett, Jackson Ford, Kurt Capewell, and Tohu Harris. And on the bench is Freddie Lussick, Tom Ale, Bunty Afoa, and Dylan Walker. Somehow I managed to say the Warriors' names a little bit better than the Storm for some reason. This game's going to be quite interesting for me because one thing I'm curious about is how are the Melbourne Storm going to fare against, I guess, an easier opponent in the Warriors without Cameron Munster again this week. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of production they have. The Warriors are, or they have shown from last season that they can be a strong defensive side. So they could really limit the points that Melbourne Storm put up this week. I think they will certainly find some resistance, but I think they'll find it a little bit easier to score. But there's still going to be that question mark at times about execution because it's Pizzette instead of Munster. But players like Ryan Pappenhausen can really break down teams through the middle and get overlaps on the left and right edges. Jerome Hughes can create things from nothing. He can get up within 10 metres, a quick step, and he's opened up the middle of the pack. So they're individuals you need to watch out for. If you let Harry Grant scoot the ball from 1 metre out, there's a good chance he's getting over the line. At least 1 out of every 3 or 4 attempts, maybe. On the side of the Warriors, though, they've got great individuals, and players like Metcalf, I think, could find ways to open gaps in this Melbourne Storm defence. But we did see, from even the great moments that the Panthers produced against Melbourne Storm, that their scramble defence was really strong to deal with them. So I think we're going to get a lot of the same of that, a lot of scramble defence from Melbourne Storm. Maybe not as much, because I think they'll find it a bit easier. The execution on the side of the Warriors is still questionable at the moment. They didn't put up too many points last week. Of course, only the Panthers didn't put up any. But one thing that we'll see from the Warriors, there's always fight and desire from them, but certainly an improvement to let a 12-0 lead slip. So we're going to see, I think, a real quick, really aggressive Warriors team right from the jump. Players like Fanua Blake can really pound teams through the middle. So it's up to Kamikamitha, King, and Liero to really slow him down. Whether they're going to do that, remains to be seen. But I think we'll see a much more aggressive Warriors team. So I think they'll kind of match the points that they scored last week and maybe do a little bit better. But they won't. I don't think they'll allow Storm to get away with this one. I don't think they'll allow too big a gap, but I think Melbourne Storm will find it a bit easier, and it's more game time and experience for Jonah Pizzette, another week of training in that system to really figure out what they want to do. So with all that being said, I'm going to go with Melbourne Storm to win 1-12 points. Next up, we have the Manly Seagulls versus the Sydney Roosters, starting with the team of the Seagulls. In the backs, they have Tom Trbojevic, Tommy Tallow, Tolu Kula, Ruben Garrick, Jackson Barlow, Luke Brooks, and Delhi Cherry Evans. In the forwards is Taniela Paseka, Lachlan Croker, Josh Alea, Hamol Olakuatu, and Ben and Jake Trbojevic. On the bench is Carl Lawton, Corey Waddell, Ethan Bullymore, and Nathan Brown. Taking a look at the Roosters now, in the backs they have James Tedesco, Daniel Tupou, Joseph Sawali, Joey Manu, Dominic Young, Luke Keary, and Sam Walker. In the forwards for the Roosters, they have Jared Warrior-Hargreaves, Brandon Smith, Lindsay Collins, Siwa Wong, Sitili Tupanua, and Victor Radley. And on the bench for the Roosters, they have Sandon Smith, Nafahu White, Nat Butcher, and Terrell May. I think both these teams put in relatively unexpected performances last week. Even though I did back the Seagulls to win, of course, I didn't know it would look as it did. I think the inclusion of Luke Brooks is going to be a godsend for the Manly Seagulls, because some people may remember a couple of years ago, it was maybe 2021, maybe 2020. I think it was possibly the COVID year, that their attack, the Seagulls' attack, was beautiful to watch. They were creating opportunities in their own half early in the tackle count. They just went at teams and just broke through effortlessly. And I think they lost that a little bit. Kieran Foran isn't really the type of guy to create from nothing. They tried to find it in Schuster, then in Johns, then in Weeks, and they just didn't really find it. I think Schuster was probably their greatest prospect, but it's just, there's a whole other bag of things to go into with Schuster. But with Luke Brooks, he's found himself a home that could really allow him to flourish and be himself, and the Seagulls have found somebody that will create opportunities for them. without having to rely on Cherry Evans all the time. But then you look at Tom Trbojevic, he always plays like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders and still creates opportunities effortlessly as well. The backs of the Roosters was something that was quite impressive to me in the way that they carried the ball. They made really good meters. They weren't allowed to be slowed down by any means from the Broncos in the first and second half. There's some really good carries from Manu, some great carries from Suwali. And I think also for the future, for the Roosters, let's not drop Sam Walker. Let's just keep him there, shall we? I think it was pretty obvious that Keary and Walker is the 6 and 7 partnership that you guys need to go with. It didn't need changing. There were other things that needed some work at the Roosters. I don't know if dropping him was the best way to go. You still made playoffs in the end. You still had a good challenge, so fair enough. For this one, I think the thing that impressed me the most is how calm and collected the Roosters were compared to last season. They were a little bit frantic, a bit chaotic, but they look really calm and composed, look very professional. And I think that's going to match up well against this Seagulls team, because I think they'll want to try and play off the cuff when they can. They have Cherry Evans, who is, very structurally sound, but they'll probably want to utilise Luke Brooks and Tom Trbojevic a bit more to play off the cuff, to try and get that Roosters defence out of shape, and then put maybe some kicks in behind for Trbojevic to go after, or even Kula or Garrick or Paulo to chase after, which is difficult to outpace Dominic Young, but if you catch him out of position, which he has been seen doing last season for the Knights, you can catch him out of position and end up with some points. So I do think the Seagulls will put up some solid points, but the Roosters will be a little bit too calm and collected. They'll be very well structured. They'll be quite precise. They looked in a good flow state when their attack was moving quickly. So I think there's a good challenge to be had here. And I think there's a potential upset on the side of the Seagulls, but I'm going to lean towards the Roosters. So I'm going to go with the Roosters to win 1-12 points. Finally, for round 2, we have the Dolphins versus the St. George Illawarra Dragons. Starting with the team of the Dolphins in the backs, they have Hamiso Tabuai-Fidel, Jermaine Asako, Jake Averillo, Herbie Farnworth, Jack Bostock, Cody Nikarima, and Isaiah Katoa. In the forwards is Jesse Bromwich, Jeremy Marshall-King, Thomas Flegler, Felice Kafusi, Ewan Aitken, and Max Plath. And on the bench is Josh Kerr, Kenneth Bromwich, Mark Nichols, and Jared Wallace. Taking a look at the Dragons now, in the backs they have Tyrell Sloan, Zach Lomax, and Mosesi Suli, Jack Bird, Michaeli Ravalawa, Kyle Flanagan, and Ben Hunt. In the forwards is Francis Molo, Jacob Liddell, Blake Laurie, Tom Eisenhuth, Jaden Sewer, and Jack DeBellin. And on the bench is Connor Mulhallison, Michael Molo, Raymond Faitella Mariner, and Luciano Leilua. Now, one thing I don't want the Dolphins to do is to try and allow Kyle Flanagan to look like the second coming of Darren Lockyer. Okay, let's just pump the brakes a little bit here. Now, last week's performance from the Dolphins was disappointing because I was really questioning taking the Dolphins to beat the Cowboys. When I looked at the two teams on paper, and I'll just reference basically who I've already gone over: Tabuai-Fidel, Isako, Averillo, Farnworth, and Bostock, and then throwing Nikarima and Katoa in the back. So I thought, hang on a minute, they've got some great individuals that can create moments, because two of the players in these backs now, Averillo and Farnworth, easily for me go in a top 5 list, top 10 at worst, of players that created moments from nothing last season. Jake Averillo was incredible at that. You give him a little bit of space, he's round the outside, he is gone. Herbie Farnworth is the exact same. And that's what I liked about the Broncos, because Katoni Staggs does that as well, and Farnworth we saw do that for the Broncos. So I love Averillo and Farnworth in this team. Absolutely love it, because they can create moments from nothing. The biggest issue for me is not having Sean O'Sullivan in this team. I think he's going to be your best kicker. He's going to give you the best structure. So potentially they'll miss him, but the fact that they've got players like Jesse Bromwich and Thomas Flegler through the middle to punch holes, then they've got Jeremy Marshall-King off the back of it, who can really set the tone, set the pace through the middle, is great to have on your team. On paper, the Dolphins look really, really strong, and they'll want to right a lot of wrongs from last week and put in a much more solid defensive shift. On the side of the Dragons, I'm still not fully convinced. It may have just been an off day for the Titans. I'm still not fully convinced. That doesn't mean that all the hard work they've put in and the great effort they put in last week is just completely forgotten about. It certainly isn't. So I think there's a close game to be had here. I've got a 2-point gap at the moment. It's which way am I going to go is the question. I've got a 2-point gap. And you look at the forwards they've got, Francis Molo, Blake Laurie, I think could be a real weapon through the middle. Jack DeBellin, at his best, can also help punch holes through the middle. Jacob Liddell, I'm not entirely convinced is going to offer too much in that number 9 role. What I do think is going to be a good thing for Cal Flanagan especially is I get the feeling that Ben Hunt can kind of mould him into the player that he needs him to be. So as long as Cal Flanagan is a sponge and is willing to take in information and retain it, Ben Hunt can provide all the info, all the tactics in the world, and hopefully Cal Flanagan can improve as a result of that, and therefore allow the Dragons to be a much more competitive team, which would just be great to see. It's always nice seeing teams finishing near the bottom that start making their way up the ladder. So I do think both these teams will put on a really good show, but just based on the individuals that they've got, and the fact that I think last week was a little bit of an outlier for both teams, only slightly, I'm going to go with the Dolphins to win 1-12 points. So to quickly recap my round 2 predictions, I'm going to take the Broncos and Sharks to win by 13+, the Panthers to win by 1-12, Raiders 13+, then I'm going to take the Cowboys, Melbourne Storm, Roosters and Dolphins all to win by 1-12. In terms of winners' confidence, I'm at about 75%. I think there's a few question marks in there. And in terms of margin confidence, I'm at about 80%. I think if all the teams that I've predicted to win do win, I don't see many other circumstances in which the margin is more or less than what I've gone with, unless there are maybe sin bins or red cards in there. But yeah, that is my recap for round 2. So that's going to be it for this video. If you have any predictions, do let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed, feel free to leave a like. It really does help to push the video out to more people. If you enjoy this kind of rugby league content, feel free to subscribe also and turn on notifications to stay up to date with the new uploads. But yeah, that's going to be it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.